Hi, everybody. Joe Cioffi here on a Sunday night as we take a look at some busy weather that's going on around the country. I'm going to start off with the current weather. It's been a while since we've actually had active weather enough that we've got some watches and warnings up, so I thought I'd put those up for you. And you can see from the Weather Service, and this is accessed at weather.gov, which is a pretty a pretty useful website for sure, and there's so much here. I tell people all the time, if you just take a look at some of the websites from some of the other nations, from their weather services, and a lot of people have mentioned this to me, the amount of information that's given out is sorely lacking. But we do have various winter weather advisories, winter storm warnings, up for parts of southern Montana and western Wyoming. And we also have a blizzard warning that's up for southeast North Dakota and northeastern South Dakota. Now, this area, it's not so much the amount of snowfall, because most of the forecasts that I saw, the snowfall amounts aren't that excessive, but it's due to the fact that there's going to be some pretty wicked winds of gusts of 50 miles an hour or more, coupled with the heavy snow that'll probably cause some whiteout conditions. And we have winter storm watches up for much of the northern half of Minnesota on up into northeastern Minnesota. This is the storm is just basically going to track northeastward, the storm center, up toward the western Lake Superior. So this is where we see the extent of the warnings. Also, by the way, there's some cold air that's being driven down into California, and particularly into Southern California, inland areas. We have various hard freeze watches up and frost warnings and so on. So this is a little unusual, but not unheard of. But the weather pattern that we are in certainly is changing to the new pattern that's going to be setting up in the next couple of days. Now, here's the western satellite loop. And you can see the storm center that is now moving up into the western plains, and a lot of clouds up in the northern Rockies. You're getting some snow there. There's some moisture that's streaming up toward the Dakotas and into Minnesota. You can also see a system that's offshore the Pacific Northwest. Much of California is dry, but there is that cold air that's getting drawn down on the backside of this developing storm to the northeast. And you've got this upper low that's sitting out in the middle of off the coast here, well to the southeast of the coast of California, just sort of spinning away and not doing very much. And this is all part of the long-term equation that is setting up going forward. Meanwhile, as we look in the eastern part of the U.S., we can take the vantage point from the east looking westward. And we'll bring it up front here for you, and you can see there isn't too much happening. We've got low pressure out in the open waters of the Atlantic moving northeastward, little upper air disturbance moving off the northeast coast. Otherwise, it's pretty dry out to the west, and then you start to see the clouds from the system that is again heading up into the westernmost Great Lakes. So all of this, is pretty much on course with what we're going to expect over the next several days and beyond. And we are going to take a look at our friendly neighborhood GFS model as we watch what happens over the course of the next several days. I kind of have it jumped ahead here, so let me just fix this up. I'm going to switch over. I think we want to see the precip with the frozen. We'll start at the beginning. And there you have it. So we are at this evening here. This is the new late afternoon GFS. And as we move along, here's that storm system. And you can see the problems for Monday with heavy snows in the darker blues in the eastern Dakotas and on up through much of Minnesota. Pretty deep low pressure there moving into northwestern Wisconsin and heading northeastward, 982 millibar low here. So that's a pretty tight little low. Strong northwest flow behind it. You can see how tight the isobars are, so there's no surprise that we have a blizzard warning there. And in fact, when we look at the forecast snow amounts, we can take a look at 24-hour snowfall, which is always useful. But this is, again, it's not going to be a whole lot of snow here overall. Most of the snow amounts are generally under 6 inches, except for a pocket here. As you move up toward the Canadian border, you start to get into some 6-inch plus amounts. But it's really the fact of the wind and the restricted visibility that is going, and the falling temperatures. In this particular instance, the temperatures won't be that far off in terms of the what they used to have in the old blizzard criteria, where they had the temperatures as part of the criteria, which they don't have anymore. Now here's that front now as it goes toward the East Coast, and by Tuesday evening, you can see that the front is on the coast, getting a lot of showers here up and down from New England all the way down into Georgia and Alabama and into the Florida Panhandle. The model still wants to at least suggest that there could be a changeover to sleet or wet snow at the very end on the western edge of the precipitation. And then the front moves out and it just kind of stalls off the southeast coast and into the Gulf of Mexico. And we still see the model indicating that a wave is going to develop on this front. Now, one of the things that's been happening is that the runs that are coming out in the late morning and that start running at 10:30 a.m. and the other run that starts at 10:30 p.m. have been further east with all this, while the in-between runs, which are at 4:30 a.m. and 4:30 p.m., this is the 4:30 p.m. run, keep shifting back to the west. I'll show you on the old run for the same time, for example, that the western edge of the precip is just barely to the coast. The wave is weaker and flatter and further to the east. The run before this, it was back further to the west and actually a little bit faster. So you can see the dilemma here with regards to which runs do we believe. Now, usually the ones that come out at 10:30 a.m. and 10:30 p.m., the 0Z and 12Z runs, that has all the fresh data. There usually isn't much fresh data in the 6 to 18, so it's hard to know which one has got the better view here. But I think we're going to have to run the risk. We certainly have to put it in the forecast that there's a chance of rain or wet snow on Friday, and we'll just wait to see what later model runs have. And even the upper air, when we look at this, by the way, it's hard to gain a clue as to which model has the better handle on this. Let me just pull that upper air for you. There really is, there's this south-southwest flow up the eastern seaboard. And, it's going to really depend on how far offshore does that frontal zone get and then where the wave winds up. The European was further east. Now, the European's been continuously showing a much more westward track with the wave, and now it suddenly has it so far east that it has hardly any precip close to the coast at all. But again, that model has been terribly inconsistent. We do have, going into this weekend, a strong upper air disturbance that's dropping out of the Great Lakes that swings eastward. Now, how much room is there going to be is going to depend on this first wave, because what the first wave going out, what it does is it takes basically all the moisture out with it. So I don't know what this is going to have left to work on, if it has anything left to work on at all. And then very interestingly, as we move into the middle of next week, so now we're at December 12th, 13th, both the European and the GFS show a very strong upper air system diving southeastward out of Canada. I'll show you the European's view. And there you see it. I mean, even the European is actually even more dynamic with this and wants to, in the long range, now I think this is going to change. I mean, it's got a pretty wrapped up low east of New Jersey, south of Long Island by a week from Wednesday. That's 10 days from now. The upper airs are very similar on both models, but the GFS is a little weaker, so it has a weak surface low to the north and basically a cold front, which is certainly within in the realm of possibility here with what we're dealing with. But first things first will be the wave at the end of the week that we're going to have to contend with. And I think it may not be for another day or two before we have that part of the equation figured out. All in all, the upper air pattern, as we've been talking about, there really isn't that much that's changed here. I'll show you the Europeans' view. Now, here we are now with that basic west to east flow across the United States. And you can see when we get to Wednesday and Thursday how much it changes. You've got this big upper high in the west. You've got this ridge in the Atlantic building up to Greenland, a vortex in the middle, and that sets up a flow from northern Canada straight southward into the eastern two-thirds of the United States. And when you have all this amplitude, in particular when you have this big high that's out in the west, that very, very strong ridge, you're going to have these deep trough in response, and you're going to watch. We're going to have to watch for the possibility of something eventually coming down in this long jet that's setting up from northwest Canada into the southeast coast of the United States, some sort of disturbance coming down. That's what I think the model is showing, as you can see on the GFS, on the European here, how it swings that around. Let me back it up again, and you can see, really well how this works. You can notice that once we get to Thursday, things stop moving west to east. Basically, the upper low in eastern Canada just rotates around and around, and you wind up with a strong disturbance at the end of the period, dropping toward the southeastward, toward the mid-Atlantic coast on the European model. The GFS, again, a little weaker, but it generally has the same idea. So I think that, we're going to be in a very, very interesting pattern going forward, a very dynamic pattern, one that is going to be cold, and one that I think is going to offer some surprises along the way. The thing, I want to see how it sets up. I want to see how, it handles this first wave at the end of this week, as to whether the models perform well with it or not. That certainly could be a good clue going forward as to what we may have in the coming 2 or 3 weeks. And I think, by the way, I should show you one other thing here before I come back to you guys on the board. Let me just show you the teleconnection indices, because I want to clear up again the notion that the block is the most important factor here, and it's not. Okay, let me bring this up, widen it out, and okay. So here we have the teleconnections. We've got the Pacific North America Index, which is measuring basically the strength, the pressure changes in the west and northwest with that strong ridge. You've got this the PNA going to an off-the-wall reading of over plus 400, starting from December 5th and then lasting right through the 13th, and it's still very high right through December 17th. The NAO comes to a neutral position at the end of this week. So this is where we're looking at December 9th, 10th as the possibility of something happening here at the end of this week. And then it goes slightly positive for the rest of the period. That, again, to me is not a big deal. The fact that we have this strong PNA, and also the fact that the Eastern Pacific Oscillation, which measures the pressure changes in the Eastern Pacific, much like the North Atlantic Oscillation measures the pressure changes in the North Atlantic, is negative. When you've got the positive PNA and the negative EPO, that is usually a cold signature for the eastern part of the United States. And in fact, we spent the winters of 2013-14 and the winters of 2014-15 with a positive PNA, a negative EPO, and a positive NAO. In other words, there was no blocking or very little blocking. So the blocking, it's nice when you have it, but it's not the end all. We've had the NAO negative for the month of November for almost the whole month, and it really didn't translate into anything very much because it was east-based. But for the first time in quite a while, we have this combination of the Pacific North America Index and the Eastern Pacific Oscillation, the PNA being positive, the EPO being negative, and that's a far more impressive signal to keep our focus on. So good to see Chris Alley on board. And yes, Christopher, today I did the Longwood Library in Middle Island. I have 2 in January coming up, and one is on January 8th. Monday, January 8th, I am going to be at the Bayport Blue Point Library. Saturday, January 27th, I will be at the Lindenhurst Library. So I think, Chris, you might be interested in that because that's not too far from where you are. So I'll be at the Lindenhurst Library on Monday, January 27th. Let me take a look at what's happening here with, excuse me, with regards to your comments. And I hope everybody, by the way, had a great Sunday. I'm kind of winding down here today. When I do these talks, I'm tired by the time we get to the evening. So, yes, my cat, by the way, is much better. And I think he's just laying down right now, but he's been in pretty good shape. So I'm just checking out your comments here, folks, and hello back to everyone. And let's see. Yes, Steve Franco, very interesting with this winter pattern. I really believe that somewhere along the way in the next couple of weeks, something's going to happen somewhere here in the East. The pattern to me looks just too dynamic for it just to be basically cold and dry. So we're going to have whatever it is. It's going to have to be, a perfect setup because of the time that we're still into the early part of December. But the seeds are there, and I think that something at some point is going to happen. Whether it's at the end of this week, which I'm thinking not so likely, but maybe next week might be a better chance. Steve Lapointe, last winter the Euro was right more than the GFS when predicting winter weather, such as it was, and you relied more on it. It's why you did so well. Oh, okay. Thanks. Well, I use a combination of things when I look at everything, and I try to get a feel for what model is working. The European has been very inconsistent for the last number of weeks. It's been quite inconsistent. And the GFS, I think, actually, from a day-to-day standpoint, may be performing, to my opinion anyway, the way I use it, a bit better. So, that could change on a dime. It just seems to me that the European, for some reason, I'm not sure why, just lately has been, all over the place, whereas the GFS seems to be locking in on things. But, this could also be a function of the block, because the fact that the models just handle the block have been so unstable from run to run. Let's see. Jason Schaefer, GFS actually, yeah. Models. Sometimes models have moments of victory, and maybe the GFS is onto something. But on the other hand, with this wave on Friday, the European, going back a few runs ago, was bullish for wave action and rain and snow for Friday, and then suddenly today it just kind of pulled it out to the east. The general experience over the last 6 weeks plus with these waves along the coast with these fronts is that it winds up that they're further west at the last minute. So I think we're gonna I won't rule that possibility out. 540 Tom Adams is usually where the rain snow line is. However, I think one of the reasons why when we look at the models, particularly the GFS, which is trying to show maybe a bit more rain on the coast, even though the thicknesses are down in the 528 range, I think the reason for that is the fact that the wind direction may be more off the warm ocean, and as a result, the very bottom of the atmosphere may be shot, even though you go up not that far up, it's very cold. The 5,000 foot level or the 850 millibar level would definitely would support snow with temperatures of -5 to -10°C. But it could be, it's probably that the model is thinking that the very bottom of the atmosphere may have some problems, unless the wave is deeper as it moves northward and our surface wind becomes more north-northeast over time. If that happens, then I think that you would wind up with more snow than anything else along the coast, even at this time of year. It's a tough call. It's the first snow of the season, and that makes it always a difficult proposition from a forecasting standpoint. I've always had a tough time with the first snowfall, because you want to get it right. It's the first one. And you definitely don't want to bust on that particular forecast, but it's extra difficult because of because of the time of year. You've got to have, a lot of your pieces. You get into late December, and then you're certainly into January and February. You don't have to have absolutely perfect setups because of the time of year, climatology, and so on. But this time of year for our neck of the woods, it still can be a bit problematic. Nancy Oxford, I don't know about snow in Atlanta anytime soon, but at least the pattern is a much more wintry pattern than what you've been experiencing over the last couple of winters. So, maybe at some point during this winter, you may get a shot. If that blocking signature shows up on a regular basis as we get into January and February, I would think that absolutely will happen. Jason Schaefer, yes, water temperatures are still in the 50s. I don't think that is the actual number. Even if they were in the upper 40s, I think it would still be a problem. But even with the temperatures that high, if the wind direction is a little more northerly, say 02, 03, as opposed to 05 or 06 or 07, you could still I think you would probably see some snow along the coast. Toby Vermet, is there an advantage of using ensemble model in the long run? Well, my problem with the ensembles is that you're basically taking 22 models with 22, or however the number is, 20, let's say 20. So you're taking 20 models with 20 solutions, and in wide extremes, and just kind of averaging them all out. I don't know that's a good forecast tool. Now, if you got a situation where you've got 20 members of the let's say 20 members of the ensemble, and 16 of them are trending in one particular direction, while the other 4 are in another direction, and then at least when you average it, it's going to be biased toward the side that has the most support. So I guess from that standpoint, it's kind of helpful. But I've my experience with them, I don't really use them all that much, even with going into the long range. And the reason why I don't use them all that much going into the long range is that because I kind of much rather would use my head in terms of trying to figure out the forecast instead of starting to become reliant on more models and more models and more models. My brain was kind of trained at a time when we didn't have all these things. So, I can look at an upper air pattern. I can look at a jet stream pattern and, see it evolve out over a course of a number of days. And I already know in my head where it could go without really having to look at a bunch of the ensembles and having them tell me the same thing. I kind of would rather use my own head on this. So I don't really look at them too much. I do check on them from time to time, but I'm not a big fan of them. Let's put it that way. Cullen, the ensembles are good for sniffing out BS in the operational. Yeah, I think that's true, but there are times when the operational does something that you think it's BS and it really isn't. So it's hard to know when that works and when that doesn't. It's kind of trial and error. So that's why I would much rather would look at a pattern and try to figure it out without having to rely on yet another model to help me with it. Um, from where you were, Steve LaPointe, with PIX, you always take one storm at a time, which you are the smarter one because of your experience. Thank you. Yeah, I do. For those of you who don't haven't followed me for too long, and those as opposed to those of you who have been following me for quite a while, you know that I generally I'm a one storm at a time person. Okay. Especially once we get close to an event and we're starting to figure out whether there are going to be watches and warnings. So maybe I'm letting you know now, when that is the case. I am really super focused on that, and I don't really look too deeply at anything else that's coming down the road. And I think that's a wise thing for you young forecasters who might be watching, because I have been told that there are a number of you lurking out there that watch my videos, and I really appreciate that. Thank you for being here. But, if I leave you with one thing, try and take these things one at a time. This way, you're going to go crazy. If you're going to start focusing and dividing all your attention up over a 16-day time frame, when you've got a pressing event coming inside the 5-day period, you're not going to really be able to. You're not going to develop your forecasting sense and those mental tools that you're going to use as you move on in your careers. So take them one at a time. You will be a far saner person if you do. And yes, Alcina Al-Walzi, yesterday I looked at the UCMET for the first time in quite a while, and I find the UCMET model very useful, especially when you've got some divisiveness showing up in the European and the GFS. And by the way, I have been checking the Canadian every day, even though I haven't really mentioned it very much, because the Canadian is just, I don't know what's wrong with it. I know they did an upgrade. I was told that they did an upgrade on it recently, but it just seems to be off the wall with some stuff lately. And I'll peek at it every day after I've looked at everything else, and I don't know. It just doesn't seem to be working right now. In that respect, I'm the anti-Bernie Rayno. Okay, I guess I don't. Does he look deep into the long range all the time? I mean, I don't criticize anyone that does. If that's what their thing is, if that works for them, that's fine. It doesn't work for me. I can't do that. It's too much. My head hurts. When that happens. Joshua Pan, do I think that there has been a general trend toward less early season snow and more late season snow on the East Coast, and why? I don't know that that's the case, though, Joshua. I really don't. I can remember back through the 70s, 80s, and 90s, the December events happened from time to time, and the early events, they were always fewer. So I don't know. I would tend to think that isn't the case, particularly because if we go back, from 2000 to 2000, the last 17 winters, we've had a number of pretty active Decembers. They've picked up. In fact, statistically, I just remembered the fact that the December normal from the 70 to 2000 was, less than half of what the long-term average was. And I think over the last 16 years, we've now gone back up to that number and a little bit more. So and also the fact that we've had some big snowstorms in December, so that may skew the numbers to the high side. And certainly from 1970 to 2000, we had very few. I don't think we had any snowstorms of major size during the month of December. When I say that, I'm talking about a foot plus. I don't think I can't recall. Maybe in 95 there might have been one in the winter of 95, 96, but that was the exception really in that 30-year time frame. So it might be that it's actually the other way around. Now I will say the same things happened in March. By the way, March snowfall averages have gone way up in the last 15 years compared to the prior 30. So there seems to be something going on the back end. All, interesting stuff. And if you go back and look through history, you get these periods where it's like this, and it goes back and forth. Let's see. Steve Lapointe, yes, the Weather Channel changes its weather like you change your underwear. Well, hopefully. Josh Burns, if you look at their extended forecast, it changes hour by hour. The Weather Channel is the last to get on board. I also think, Steve, that that's not a lot of those forecasts are not man-made. They are computer generated. So, if you look at the runs of the models, and they may use the GFS, they may use the NAM, they may use the RPM, which is a WSI product. And as frequently as those models change, it's going to change the forecast on those automated screens that they use and on their apps. So that's really that's the reason why it changes a lot. I don't have to do that because I don't see the point. I haven't really with all the things that we've been talking about over the last several days, I haven't really changed my outlook here. So, everything's pretty much running the same. And I'm not going to make any real changes until, maybe tomorrow the models will give me a better clue as far as what may or may not happen for the end of the week. So, speaking of the end of the week, it's the end of the video for tonight, the live stream. Thanks, everybody, for being here. Really do appreciate it. We'll go to the weekday schedule tomorrow, so look for a live stream at 6 o'clock Eastern time. And Iron Mine 10, there is no danger of me ever naming a winter storm, okay? It's not happening. It will not happen, I promise. Cynthia Guignaudas, thank you for being here. Adam Fitz, Tom Adams, Caller Turkey, Metamastodon. No, I do not name anything, so that's not going to happen. Okay, I promise. So we'll see you tomorrow, 6 o'clock Eastern time. I think I'm pretty well set on that. And I'm trying to think if there's anything else going on. No, there really isn't. So time to say goodbye. Kovu's over there. Kovu, you want to come say hi? Hang on, let me see if I can get him. Come on, everybody wants to say hi to you. Here he is. He has not been well. And you might notice from when he first started showing up on the videos that he has lost a lot of weight. I mean, I think he's gone from 20 pounds to about 8.5 pounds in a very short period of time. He has, the poor guy's got diabetes and blood sugar issues, and we had a really, really tough time getting him his blood sugar stabilized, but we finally did. Thought we were going to lose him back a few days ago, and I just lost my dog, so I didn't want to have to also, lose my cat too. But he's a good boy. He's a little. Look at this baby. Yeah, he's got a shaved leg because they were taking blood from, and he's lost a little bit of hair. But he's moving around and he's active and he's doing his thing. And I probably got the only cat that likes to be held like a baby. I've never seen anything quite like this. But he's always been incredibly affectionate. He's purring like crazy at the moment. And thank you all very much for asking about him. I appreciate it, and so does he. Okay? So, you go do what you got to do. All right? All right, folks. Have a great Sunday evening. We'll see you tomorrow.